Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Transformational Astrology. I'm Henry Seltzer, and Transformational Astrology is really a good description for what we've got going right now because we have all this Saturn-Pluto. And we've been talking about it all year. You know, it started in January, the very exact conjunction of Saturn and Pluto in chime with a lunar eclipse as well, and in chime with the naming of a new disease, which was called COVID-19. And we're seeing the Saturn-Pluto come back with a roar this summer. And when I say that, I'm talking about in the astrology, because we've been seeing a T-square between Eris on the one hand, opposite Haumea, which is another one of these new planets. And they're making a perfect T-square to the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, growing ever closer, heading towards this, here we are in September already now, heading towards this November, mid-November, the really closest event, where you have this triple conjunction when they come all back together, Saturn having been moving backwards towards Pluto, and then they will all turn direct around the end of this month. And they will be in a configuration that we have been talking about in the end of 2017. There was such a thing as a 2020 summit, and we were talking about what it looked like in November of 2020. And we were amazed to see this triple conjunction of Jupiter. When I say we, my friend Daniel Giamario did what he called a 2020 summit. He's the shamanic astrologer. He has the Shamanic Astrology Mystery School. And, you know, that was very prescient because, look, we have this complete societal reset that has been going on. We didn't know it was going to be a pandemic. But, you know, it certainly has been a societal reset, which is what we were already calling it. And I think it's given everybody a time to really check in with themselves, to really stop and think. It's been pointed out to me that not everybody has the luxury of stopping right now. Some people are stopping because they're staying at home, they're working from home, they're maybe less fully employed. Other people, though, are fully employed, namely health workers and grocery store workers and all kinds of people that are very important to the functioning of the society. And they're just having to really take their chances with COVID and also do the right things to social distance and be careful, which we all have to do. So not everybody has a chance to take a real break like some people do. And I say it's a thoughtful time because we do have this time to take a break. But even because the society is slowing down and because of all these things that are up in our face, I think it is a thoughtful time for everybody. It's a thoughtful time of just taking a look almost from the outside of what our society is all about, including aspects of social justice, you know, including the Black Lives Matter movement, which is so important and which has been so highlighted lately with the very violent activities that are being just captured on video and all over the world. You know, it's just becoming more and more obvious that there's something that has to change in the way black people in the hands of police are treated. And the idea of defund the police, you know, I mean, defund the police is a slogan that has gotten a lot of bad press because it sounds like we're saying, hey, no more cops. But that's not what they're saying. When they say defund the police, they're talking about actually reinforcing the police, not defunding the police, but reinforcing the police with extra kind of workers, with health workers, social workers, people that know how to handle situations so that if somebody is asleep in their car in the takeout lane of an A&W restaurant, it doesn't need cops with guns knocking on the window to say, hey, wake up, do you need a Uber to ride you home, right? So there's different approaches that can be taken where you could save the armed police officers for the actual situations that involve criminals and potentially violent situations. So having said all that as a prelude, let's take a look at the next big lunation coming up, which is the full moon of the very last part of the day of September 1st. It's 10:22 p.m. here on the West Coast, and it'll be early morning hours on the East Coast, and then morning hours in Europe. So in order to do that, let's see, I have to transition here. And I think you should be able to see the chart now. So what we're looking at is the chart of the exact moment of the full moon, and we're looking at it with a San Francisco location. So for that, by means of that, we're looking at a West Coast chart. I generally tend to do that because we're located on the West Coast, and Yeah, sometimes people do a Washington, D.C. chart for the United States and say this is what's happening in the United States, but I like to think that we can think about it in a more localized way. You know, it doesn't have to be all centralized like that. So I look at it on the West Coast, and that does, the only difference is that this ascendant symbol, which you can see down here with a circle with a horizontal line, is the ascendant symbol in the time passages software. You can put the mouse on it, it says ascendant in Taurus at 15 degrees. That symbol will, that ascendant will be in a different location if we're talking about a chart for the East Coast or for Europe or for anywhere else. But it's interesting to see the chart in this particular context because that makes the midheaven of the chart, which is this circle with the vertical line, very close to Saturn. So it's interesting in terms of what's going on in this chart, and let's get into that a little bit more closely. First of all, I mean, you know, the sun and the moon are opposite each other at 10 degrees of Virgo and 10 degrees of Pisces. And the thing that's very interesting about the 10-degree mark of these two signs, besides being Virgo and Pisces, is also the fact that the 10-degree mark is where Uranus is at in Taurus. So here's 10 degrees exactly trine to the 10 degrees Virgo sun in this new moon configuration. And of course, the other thing that's very interesting in this chart, and you can see that it's kind of a grand cross. You can see the great big red lines going straight across and straight back and forth. We have Venus at 25 Cancer. We have Saturn at 25 Capricorn. We have both Eris and Mars together in Aries, somewhere with 26 degrees somewhere between them. And 26 degrees across the way is, in Libra, is Haumea. And this is that new planet Haumea, which is one of the new ones that have been named recently as 2006 and 2008 by the IAU, which is the International Astronomical Union, the astronomers. And they decided that these planets that are new planets that are in the Kuiper Belt, including Pluto, remember famously demoting Pluto to dwarf planet, these planets in the Kuiper Belt should be called dwarf planets because they're a little bit small. And even though they're planets in just the full-on sense of the word planets, they orbit the sun, they're spherical in shape, they have moons. Eris has a moon, 2 moons, and also so does Pluto have moons. Anyway, they are pretty much planets, but they didn't want to have all those planets coming in, new items, and a lot of fights about whether they're a planet or not on the smaller and smaller ones. So the 4 biggest ones have been named as dwarf planets, including Pluto, Eris, Haumea, and Makemake. And they do have distinct meanings in charts. Eris is a feminine warrior energy for soul intention. That's been pretty much clearly demonstrated, I believe. And then Haumea and Makemake do have to do with a profound connection to nature and to natural law. And that's very important to recognize. They're indigenous. They're named after indigenous gods and goddesses. A female one, which is the Haumea, which is the feminine goddess warrior. I'm sorry, not warrior. That's Eris. Eris is the feminine warrior. Haumea is the feminine creation goddess of the Hawaii culture, and she could wave a wand and make food appear, as is true in the islands. You know, there's just food everywhere. And other things, she could give birth from all parts of her body and regenerate as a young woman again. It's very much a symbol for nature itself. And I find that it's very true that this really indicates the powerful presence in some people's charts of Haumea, indicates a strong connection to nature. So I just call it profound connection to nature and to natural law, nature's spiritual path. Makemake is quite similar, also has to do with profound connection to nature. Maybe a little bit more activist. This is the male god of the pair. One is female goddess, the creation goddess of Hawaii, and this is the male god, the creation god of the Rapa Nui culture, another Polynesian culture. So they're named after these indigenous creation gods and goddesses, and they do have to do with nature as a fundamental factor of our existence. We are part of nature, and recognizing that has been more and more what's been coming along in this 21st century when these new planets were also named and discovered and named. So to make a long story short, I'm getting a little talkative here. We do have this really strong T-square between Eris and Mars was lighting up Eris in the new moon, which was 2 weeks ago, was just exactly conjunct, just a little bit past the position of Eris in Aries. And then you see Saturn being at 25 degrees and 55 minutes of Capricorn is really only about 1/4 of a degree away from the position of Haumea. So this is very strong. if you look at the midpoint of Saturn and Pluto, in fact, it's about 24 degrees. In fact, in the time passages software, you can do the midpoints, and that's under reports. So you get midpoints, and we're going to look at the Saturn-Pluto midpoint. So here we are with Saturn, Pluto. Here we go. So it is 24 degrees of Capricorn and 19 minutes, Saturn-Pluto. Well, this Eris position is 24 degrees of Aries in 24 minutes. So we're talking about a 5-minute difference between these two positions. So very strong. Eris is very strong in square to Saturn and Pluto in combination. They're only separated by about 3 degrees now. As they retrograde, and they're going to stay right at this degree as they station by the end of the month. And then also Jupiter is stationing even sooner on the 12th of September. So the point being, we do have this very strong presence of Saturn and Pluto and Uranus. Uranus is not only trined by the Sun and sextiled by the Moon in this full moon configuration, but it's also very interesting to note that between Neptune and Uranus there is a septile, or a seventh of the circle, which is to say 360 degrees divided by 7, which is 51 degrees and 23 minutes. And if you add it up, you find it's only about 3/4 of a degree of a difference between a perfect septile. So the septile is very interesting. You know, it's an unusual aspect. It does have to do with kind of an occult meaning, or a kind of a dark side of the connection. And it is with Neptune, and that's going to come up. I'm going to be talking about that in a couple of minutes because I think it's very important right now. But just to cover the basics, we know that both Eris and Haumea are involved in this T-square. We know that Saturn-Pluto is about the structural transformation of society and also of our individual lives, our individual selves. And we're under this new pressure, we're under this difficult and different situation that we find ourselves in. And in fact, we are changing, we are evolving by necessity, as evolution often is, by necessity. And so as we come along to a new vision for ourselves, what we're basically doing is aligning with our most sincere and bottom line values, which is what Eris is all about. It's discovering what is your bottom line, what is your most fundamental position, and what is it that you cannot not do. How do you find your life purpose, which is basically tuning into this mission that you have that drives you, the principles that drive you at the most basic. And not just any old principles, because it does have to do with attuning to your moral compass within you, which has to do with natural law and has to do with being part of nature and recognizing all creatures. I love this. All creatures, all humans, are all part of the same family. So here we are in the family of the earth, including the rocks, the trees, the rivers, the mountains, the atmosphere, the Gaia principle, considering the earth as an organism, and all the creatures within the earth as separate organisms, all worthy of attention, all worthy of respect, all worthy of protection. And, the John Donne poem, which is famous for the line, "For whom the bell tolls," which is made into a phrase that was used, as a novel by Hemingway as well. He says, back in the 16th century, I believe, he says, "If a cloud be washed away from the shores of England, England is the less for it." And just so, as all people are part of our own body, our own organism. And so he says, never seek to ask for whom the bell tolls at a funeral setting. It tolls for thee. So I think that's a profound lesson of our times, a lesson that we're all trying to learn one way or another, a lesson that we're evolving towards in our individual actions, whatever they may be, whether it's Black Lives Matter or whether it's right-wing conservative principles, whatever your most deepest values are, it is time to act upon them, and it's time to be counted. And interestingly, right now, because we have such a strong Saturn, and Saturn is not only part of Saturn-Pluto, but it's exactly opposite Venus, as I mentioned. It's almost exactly square to this position of Haumea in the sky right now. And just in general, it's very magnified in this current situation. It's been opposite. It was exactly, let's see, it was in conjunct the new moon of the 18th of August 18th, which was at 26 degrees of Leo at the time when Saturn was still at 26 degrees a couple of weeks ago. So, there's just so much Saturn in our situation right now. And it shows. I mean, one thing about Saturn is it takes longer to get things done. You really have to concentrate and focus. It's like having Mercury retrograde. You find that just when you thought you had it figured out, you have to drop back and do it again. Some obstacle comes up. You have to work your way through the obstacle, which sounds terrible, but it does build character. It does give you long-lasting lessons. It does imply dedication to your purpose and really focusing and really making it happen, right? And Saturn is also, of course, the ruler of Capricorn. And Capricorn, the higher octave, so to speak, the higher mandate of Capricorn is the improvement of society. Society as an experiment, an evolving organism just like we are, that has its highs and its lows and has its ways to improve and to become better. And the improvement and the betterment of society is the highest mission of Capricorn. So we are seeing that expressed in this time with the strong Pluto-Saturn and with a strong Saturn. And what do we have in the news today? But we have this tremendous polarization between a conservative and a progressive point of view. And what does that remind you of? Well, Uranus. Uranus is very much the experimenter, new ideas, do it anyway, do anything, jump out of the, think out of the box, jump out of the box. It's the Fool card in the Tarot, stepping off the cliff without a care, knowing that somehow they will be supported and knowing that somehow it will all work out all right, this new vision, this new idea, the new experiment. And they say surprises, so there's always something changing, always something surprising happen. We've been seeing that. And we have this double vision right now of both Saturn and Uranus being very powerful in the skies. And we have this polarization within our country of the United States, especially right now. So we're seeing this extremity, and we just have to be true to ourselves, and we have to be true to our inner vision, what we can muster to be the best version of ourselves that we can come up with. And that's where we're at. Now, what I wanted to add to this, these are the outer planets, Saturn, Pluto, Uranus, also Neptune, right? And Neptune is also important in this particular configuration because we have the sextile from Jupiter with Jupiter stationing. Jupiter's going to station here. I can put the mouse on, right click, and I see the next station is 17 degrees of Capricorn, 24 minutes, which is so close to where it is now. And so it's really not moving very fast, not its normal motion. And so that makes it more powerful, more potent. Sitting in that one place, and that place is a perfect 2-degree sextile away from Neptune, which does bring Neptune into the picture. And as well, you do have the septile from Uranus. And if we do the right click on Neptune, we'll see that there is also a contraparallel to the position of Chiron. So we have Chiron emphasized here as well in that way. And what do we see? We do see that Neptune being the imagination, being the fear of falsehoods. You could be being played false with strong Neptune. It's a question of illusions, over idealizations at times. It's a question of what is the true truth. What is the fake news and what is the actual news? And do facts matter, or is it more like what the spin you put on them, right? So this is all very much part of the current scene. When we do have both progressives and conservatives asserting their viewpoint and trying to put their own spin on what's happening, and it's quite dramatic, I believe. I mean, certainly in this country, it's amazing. You see all these statements being made, and they flat out contradict each other at times. What's the truth? What's the truth that we're really trying to get at? And so discernment becomes very important. So that's the situation we have. The way it shows up in the culture is what I've been describing, but it also that's the arc of development of all of our individual lives as well. So that's what we have to keep in mind, that in spite of the difficulties, in spite of how it seems hard to deal with and isolation, and we have to be careful, of course, we have to pay attention to the science. Try not to breathe on each other. Try not to touch each other too closely if it's somebody you don't know whether they have COVID or not, right? The asymptomatic people walking around without realizing that they're carriers, that they're shedding virus. So this is a difficult situation and there again the truth comes into it, discerning the truth about the situation, or is it just an illusion that we have to wear masks, or is it the true thing that we have to wear masks? And they say that it does make a difference statistically. It makes a difference in the transmission. I think it's also partly because when you wear a mask, you're more aware of, hey, this is a situation where there's disease germs around and we don't want to catch it. If you don't wear the mask, it's easy to forget and you just kind of hang out with people like you normally do without thinking about the possibility of interacting to an extent that the COVID germ carries over. So that's what we got. And it is really important to take the more positive outlook, to say, what is the best thing I can do with myself right now? Is there studying I can do right now? Is there ways that I can transition from a career that I'm in that I'm not too happy with to a career that is a closer match with my deepest values? Because that's really what it's all about, is finding your deepest values and acting upon them, to the exclusion of consensus thinking at times, or in accord with consensus thinking, depending on whether that is what you believe yourself. So finding your own depths of belief, your own what's in the depths within you, and acting upon that is very, very important. And just to make even a highlight of this opposition, not opposition, but this the antithesis of each other is Saturn and Uranus, because Saturn is saying hold steady, don't try anything new, be cautious, don't take risks. And Uranus is saying, let's experiment, let's try something different, let's jump the tracks, let's get out of the rut. So the fact that in the West Coast, the midheaven is actually conjunct to Saturn, while the ascendant is conjunct to Uranus, is, I think, just one little added element to this whole situation that we're in the midst of now with this full moon that's happening tonight, which is very characteristic of the entire arc of development of this whole year, where we are seeing it get closer and closer to November 15th. And a pretty close combination of these three, and that will be a very difficult time, I believe, in terms of COVID, for one thing, and in terms of the political situation for another. And in terms of our own turmoil, as we try to keep ourselves straight through all this and find our way through to the other side, because there is another side. There is post-COVID world, the culture that will be emerging, and let's hope we get a few things better. We make a few things better, such as social justice, such as alternative fuels, so that we're not depending on fossil fuels with the greenhouse gases that cause extreme climate situations, which we are seeing as well. So that's all I really have to say, is that we're in the midst of it all. And Chiron is also emphasized. I mean, there is a place for that in our individual development, as we see where our inner wounding is coming up and maybe blocking us from what we really need to do. They say when you're angry, you're not angry for the reason that you think you are, because those trigger points really reflect back to earlier undigested childhood trauma, with either aggression or with authority figures, it could be, so that we have to work ourselves out. We have to straighten ourselves out and try to be friends with these difficult parts of ourselves that seem to come out of nowhere and take us over. That's the formula. What Ram Dass said was, in one of his talks, was he said, they're like monsters from the deep, and they never really go away. They don't vanish, they just become more familiar. And so they become like old friends that you can invite in for tea. But they don't really vanish. They just become more handleable, more manageable. So that's what we were dealing with, and our personal evolution is so important. And really, when you act on your own and make your personal evolution, you are helping the society move along. You are making your part, and it's like a magical thing that the ripples go out from what you do, what everybody individually does, and it lights up the world when we do the things that we really should be doing. The things that match our own moral compass, the things where we don't give up on ourselves, we don't give up on the situation, we don't give up on humanity, we don't give up on the universe, but we have faith in ourselves and faith in the universe that will see us through. So that's what I wanted to share. And I wonder if we have any questions that have come up during this time. We didn't pre-announce this session, so there may not be anybody that tuned in and wants to ask a question. But if you do want to ask a question and you're listening, go ahead and ask it. You can type it into the... how does that work exactly, Leslie? I'm not sure what they do.
They can go ahead and type it into the comments.
Type it into the comments, says Leslie. And if not, that's fine.
I don't have any questions so far, but we could give it a few minutes to see if anyone has a question they'd like to ask.
Okay, well, while we're waiting, I think what I'll do is show another chart, which is the actual, we're still in the midst of a 30-day cycle that came from the Leo new moon. We are about to have a Virgo new moon mid-month. And the other thing that's happening also between now and the 17th, which is the Virgo new moon, is we are going to have a retrograde of Mars. If I right-click on Mars, it'll tell me that it's going to retrograde at the 9th of September, and it's going to be at the 28-degree mark. So really, it doesn't get much further. It stays pretty close, within a few degrees of Eris, retrogrades, and then will come back and conjoin Eris just around the time of the election. So that's pretty profound also. The other thing that's happening is there is going to be another Mercury retrograde next month, mid-October, and that will go direct on November 3rd, so that indicates that things will not be what we think they are going into the election, coming out of it. And then the other thing to mention is that we've had the retrograde of Venus earlier, and there was another retrograde of Mercury too, and so we've had all the inner planets retrograding at this time, which gives an introspective tone to things and gives us the chance to look inside and meditate a little bit on what's going on. And here's the new moon. I brought that along just in case we wanted to check it out. I think it's quite dramatic, this new moon. We do have the very strong inconjunct 150-degree aspect drawn in brown on the chart, and then we have the blue trine and the red square. So taking this position of 24 degrees of Aries, taking this position of about 24 degrees of Capricorn, and taking the position of 26 degrees, which is the new moon, and 26 degrees of Libra, which is the Haumea position. And look what we've got. We've got this really strong T-square accompanied by a trine and in conjunct. So it's powerful times as we've been, you see it reflected in the sky. The same thing is true with individual charts. When you see somebody that's really made their mark, kind of become top of their profession and kind of well known what they do, whatever it might be, you see close aspects oftentimes because the planets in chime with each other do have an indication for life as above, so below, is what they say. So let's go back to the full moon, and let's transition back, I think, to wind up. So I hope this has been helpful. I know it's not easy times. We have a lot of challenges facing us individually, but that's when things happen. It's the Chinese proverb is, may you live in interesting times, dangerous times, because that's when things happen. That's when we have our chance. And we do have our chance, but it's a chance that we have to act upon. It's not like we can sit back, like maybe in kind of the more fun times when things were going so well and the economy was going great and we didn't have COVID and isolation. We were like kicking back a little bit. We were relaxing, enjoying ourselves, having a vacation, sports, things that we enjoyed. And that's great. There's time for that. There's a time for that. But this is not a time for that. This is a time to really focus, to pay attention, to avert the danger. And the danger is not just COVID, but the danger to our whole political system. We have to be alert to what is happening and to where things are headed and vote with our vote, of course, in 2 weeks from now, our vote, not 2 weeks, I'm sorry, 2 months. But, not only our vote, but also our actions. Everything counts. And, it's not anything to despair. It's not anything to say, gee, what can I do and feel helpless. It's the time when we are ultimately powerful, when we can really make a difference. Our individual actions, every one of them and each one of us makes a difference. And that's what we have to keep in touch with, keep reminding ourselves about. So that's what I have for you today, and I'll talk to you in a couple of weeks. Have a
Do you
good
want to
2
do
weeks.
questions?
And we do have a question. Go ahead.
Yes, we do. Um, Vicky is asking, how long will this time of disruption last into 2021? Does January 2021 ease up?
That's a good question, of course. The new moon of January is also pretty strong. So I think this is going on for a while, and this is partly based on my understanding of the COVID from what I can read about it. That it's very likely that a vaccine will be developed by the end of the year in all probability. That doesn't mean distributed. They say it's not just having a vaccine, it's having a vaccination. And so getting it to everybody is going to take time, and that's going to be a long cycle. But I believe that the spring is going to be much different than it is right now. But I do believe that the winter is going to be much the same and maybe even worse than it is right now. And I do remember checking out the new moons coming up, and I was surprised to see how strong they were, every single one of them, including January. So I think we're seeing tough times. I think there'll be tough political times between November and January, as is likely now that we see what's going on. And I think we're in for it until beyond there. Whether it's February or April when things improve, I couldn't say. But it's going to start improving, I think, if that helps. Do we have another one too, or?
We do. We have one more from Christina.
Okay.
Do you have any insight on this full moon being conjunct the North Node?
Oh, that's a good question. Let's go back to the chart then. I think you mean conjunct by sign, and it's not conjunct actually. So the nodes of the moon, the North Node is at 26 degrees of Gemini, so it's all mutable. I think that's what you must be referring to. The full moon is in mutable signs Virgo and Pisces, and then the North Node is in 26 degrees. The North Node moves backwards through the signs, and it's a 19-year cycle all the way around. So you can imagine 19 divided by 12, it takes like over a year, almost 2 years to go through each sign. And so it just entered recently the true node, which is called the actual position node, the oscillating nodal point. It did just enter into Gemini, which is interesting though, and it does hit the 26 degree mark, which is again similar to some of these other degrees. For example, 25, 55 of Saturn and 26 degrees of Libra. So yeah, I think the nodal axis is important in all this.
Henry, I'm wondering if she meant that the full moon is conjunct her natal North Node.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is that what's being asked? Well, okay, that doesn't.
I'm not sure. She didn't
Got
specify, but now that I'm thinking about it, maybe that's what she meant.
Maybe so. Yeah, maybe the moon being on her nodes. That makes sense. Sorry, I didn't interpret that according to the question that was being asked, but I think it is interesting that we do have all this mutable energy, and including the North Node. So it is a time to think and to be flexible and to try to see how we can think our way out of this being in Gemini. And then the question being is yes, anytime you have a personal point in your chart and the full moon is right on that point, like if you have a North Node at 10 degrees Pisces, let's say, or whatever it is, if it's your Sun degree in Pisces, or if it's your Mars degree in Pisces, anytime a full moon aligns very closely, a degree or so off, or exact, with a natal point in your chart, it's an important moment, and it's really time to take stock. So having a full moon on your North Node, well, the North Node really means finding where you're supposed to be putting your energy toward. They say the South Node you come in with is something you already know how to do. So if you had, for example, a South Node in Virgo, you're very practical, you're good at taking notes, you're good at the details, you're good at kind of staying grounded. But you're really being asked to move away from that into a broader perspective, to maybe make a retreat from the details and making everything happen in the physical world and keeping on top of all your stuff and keeping your things organized. Maybe make a departure from that and get a little bit more spacious, a little bit more out there, a little bit more like woo-woo, and wonder what could be, explore wider set of possibilities. So, but any natal point is important, and just think about how that is in your natal chart. Just think about what your natal chart looks like, and If you want, you can read the time passages interpretations, which are very handy. You can click on anything and see what is it like to have Jupiter in the 10th house, for example. And the basic edition is on sale. We're making a sale for people that are wanting to get their feet wet with astrology, and it's very cheap to get in. Most of the things I've showed you are just in the basic edition, and then there's more fancier features in the standard edition, the advanced edition, but the basic edition is on sale for 30% off, which I think makes it pretty darn affordable. I'm going to guess something like $50. So take advantage. I guess that's all we have time for today. Unless there's another question, we could take another question.
Nope, that's all.
That was it? Okay. So, yeah, I think that's what we wanted to talk about. Tough times, difficult times, but very, the possibilities are vast, and I think we need to lift our eyes from the difficulties and don't despair, recognize that the universe is acting in our favor, that, they say when you have a problem, like our society has had problems for a long time, and they say if you have a problem and you ignore that problem, don't worry, it'll get worse. And then you won't be able to ignore it any longer. So I think that's where we're at with our society, and with maybe in some parts of our individual lives, where we're needing to make changes, adjustments, improvements. Just try to keep the faith and do all that. Do what you need to do. Do what's in front of you to do. And talk to you in a couple of weeks. Have a good one. Bye now.